In a move that sent shockwaves across the globe, former President Donald Trump has reportedly announced that the United States will officially begin the process of withdrawing from NATO. The announcement, made during a fiery press conference in Washington, has left both allies and analysts stunned, with leaders scrambling to understand the implications of a world where America steps away from the decades-old alliance that has defined Western military cooperation since World War II. Trump, speaking in his signature combative style, claimed the decision was long overdue and described NATO as a relic of the past that costs America billions while giving nothing in return. He emphasized that the United States should no longer serve as what he called the global policeman, arguing that American taxpayers have been unfairly burdened by defense commitments to countries that, in his words, don't even pay their share. The statement came with immediate and explosive reactions. In Brussels, where NATO headquarters sits, officials were reportedly caught off guard, holding an emergency meeting behind closed doors just hours after Trump's declaration. The Secretary General of NATO, visibly shaken during his brief statement to the press, said the alliance would seek urgent clarification from Washington. Across European capitals, phones lit up as leaders from France, Germany, and the United Kingdom expressed their concern, calling the announcement a geopolitical earthquake. For decades, NATO has stood as the central pillar of transatlantic security, a deterrent against potential aggression from powers like Russia. Trump's withdrawal, if carried out, would mark a turning point not only for the alliance, but for the global balance of power itself. Trump's arguments centered around financial fairness and sovereignty. He claimed that NATO members have taken advantage of the United States for years, relying on American troops and funds for protection while failing to meet their own defense spending obligations. "We've been footing the bill for everyone's safety except our own," he said. "It's time for America to look out for America." He described the move as part of his broader plan to restore U.S. independence from what he views as entangling alliances. Trump, who has long criticized international institutions like the United Nations and World Health Organization, framed this as an act of liberation. "We don't need outdated treaties holding us back," he declared. "We are strong enough to stand on our own." The reaction in Europe was immediate panic mixed with disbelief. French President Emmanuel Macron reportedly convened an emergency Security Council meeting in Paris, describing the move as an unprecedented rupture in Western unity. Germany's chancellor delivered a stern televised statement, saying Europe must now rethink its security architecture and perhaps prepare for a world without American military support. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer called the move a dangerous gamble that puts peace at risk. Eastern European nations like Poland and the Baltic states, which depend heavily on NATO's presence to deter Russia, were said to be in crisis mode. Reports from Warsaw described government officials in emergency session discussing the potential for a regional defense pact independent of the United States. Moscow's reaction was swift and telling. The Kremlin released a statement describing Trump's announcement as the inevitable decline of Western hegemony, while state media in Russia openly celebrated the potential weakening of NATO. China, meanwhile, responded more cautiously but noted that the decision represented a realignment of global priorities. Within hours, financial markets reacted sharply. The U.S. dollar fell slightly as investors rushed to safe havens, while defense stocks and European markets experienced turbulence. The global uncertainty triggered an immediate surge in oil prices, reflecting fears of instability in regions once protected by NATO deterrence. Back in Washington, the political fallout was just as intense. Trump supporters hailed the move as a bold step toward American sovereignty. Conservative commentators described it as the fulfillment of Trump's long-held promise to put America first. At rallies across the country, crowds cheered the announcement, chanting, "No more endless wars," and "Bring our troops home." Trump's base sees the withdrawal as a rejection of what they consider to be decades of establishment-driven foreign entanglements that drained U.S. resources. However, critics from both parties slammed the decision as reckless and dangerous. Republican senators with backgrounds in national security warned that it could embolden adversaries like Russia and China. Democrats called it an attack on the international order, accusing Trump of playing into the hands of America's rivals. Former President Barack Obama issued a rare public statement, calling the move a grave mistake that undermines the security of the free world. Former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton described it as a gift to Putin, while former NATO commanders voiced deep concern about the alliance's survival. General Wesley Clark, who once led NATO forces in Europe, told reporters that the announcement represented the most serious threat to Western security in 75 years. Even within the Pentagon, there were reports of confusion and quiet dissent. Anonymous officials suggested that military leaders were blindsided by the decision and that discussions about the logistics of withdrawal had barely begun. We're talking about thousands of troops, dozens of bases, and decades of strategic planning, one source said. You can't just walk away overnight. Despite the uproar, Trump appeared unmoved. During a late-night interview on cable television, he doubled down on his stance, saying, "We don't need NATO to protect us. NATO needs us." He went on to accuse European nations of exploiting American generosity. They built their social programs on the back of American defense spending, he said. That's over. When pressed about potential threats from Russia or China, Trump dismissed the concern, claiming those nations respected strength and would think twice before testing U.S. resolve. He also hinted that the U.S. could pursue new bilateral defense agreements directly with nations willing to deal fairly. The suggestion raised further questions about whether the United States was seeking to replace NATO with a more selective set of military partnerships. Meanwhile, ordinary Americans appeared divided. Some praised the decision as a long overdue correction to decades of overspending on foreign defense, while others feared it signaled America's retreat from global leadership. In major cities, protests erupted, with demonstrators carrying signs reading, "Save NATO" and "Don't abandon our allies." On social media, the debate raged fiercely, with hashtags like #NATOExit and #AmericaAlone trending globally. Some users mocked the move as another instance of Trump's isolationist tendencies, while his supporters hailed it as visionary. Analysts on major news networks described it as potentially the most consequential foreign policy decision of the 21st century. In Europe, the move reignited old debates about the continent's reliance on the United States. European Union leaders began discussing the creation of a unified European defense force, a concept long resisted but now viewed as necessary. French officials argued that Europe must take its destiny into its own hands, while German policymakers called for increased defense budgets and deeper military integration within the EU. Some European commentators suggested that the withdrawal could even lead to the end of NATO altogether, predicting that without U.S. leadership, the alliance would collapse under its own weight. Others argued that this could be a catalyst for European independence, forcing the continent to grow stronger and more self-reliant. Russia and China, meanwhile, watched closely. Kremlin strategists reportedly saw the moment as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to expand influence in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Chinese analysts suggested that the withdrawal would weaken the West's ability to coordinate sanctions and responses to global crises. Iran, North Korea, and other nations historically at odds with U.S. power expressed satisfaction, calling it a new era of multipolarity. The geopolitical chessboard appeared to be shifting rapidly. Analysts warned that power vacuums tend to invite conflict, and with the U.S. stepping back from its global commitments, smaller nations could become flashpoints in a new kind of Cold War. Inside the United States, the constitutional and legal implications of withdrawing from NATO also became a subject of fierce debate. Experts noted that Congress may have the authority to block or slow the process, as treaties require legislative oversight. Some senators immediately proposed bills to prevent the withdrawal, arguing that such a move would endanger national security and violate existing commitments. Legal scholars began dissecting whether the president could unilaterally withdraw from an international treaty without congressional consent. The courts could soon be pulled into the fray, adding a new layer of complexity to an already explosive situation. Economically, the repercussions could be far-reaching. The U.S. defense industry, heavily integrated with NATO supply chains, could face disruptions. European defense firms might see sudden demand spikes as countries rush to strengthen their own capabilities. The U.S. might save billions in overseas commitments, but analysts warned that the long-term cost and global influence could be far greater. The dollar's stability, often supported by America's role as global protector, might be tested in ways unseen since the post-war era. Some economists speculated that allies could start diversifying their reserves away from the U.S. dollar, mirroring moves already made by countries like China and Russia. As the dust settled, Trump continued to frame the decision as a triumph of national independence. "We're not abandoning anyone," he insisted during a rally in Florida. "We're just not letting anyone take advantage of us anymore." His supporters roared in approval. For them, this was not isolationism, but realism, a return to America's interests first and foremost. However, global analysts warned that the world might not view it the same way. For much of the planet, America's leadership has been both a stabilizing force and a guarantee of deterrence. Without it, the geopolitical landscape could quickly turn unpredictable. Within NATO, leaders scrambled to project calm. The Secretary General vowed that the alliance would endure, even without the United States. NATO is more than one country, he said, though few believe that the alliance could truly function without its most powerful member. Diplomats began lobbying Washington to reconsider, or at least delay the move, while some quietly hoped a future administration might reverse course. Yet the damage to credibility had already been done. Allies began to doubt whether they could ever again rely on America's word, a sentiment that could have long-lasting consequences for U.S. diplomacy. By nightfall, news networks across the world looped footage of Trump's announcement. Headlines read, "America leaves NATO," and the end of the Western alliance? Commentators described it as a defining moment of the century, the end of the old order. For America's rivals, it was a vindication of their belief that the Western system was fragile. For allies, it was a moment of betrayal. For Trump and his supporters, it was a declaration of freedom. Whatever one's perspective, one fact became clear: history had shifted. The world that awoke the next morning was no longer the same as the one that existed the night before.